Welcome to the Design Materials channel. I am Edson Mafuz, architect and professor of architectural design at the School of Architecture, Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre, Brazil. I'm back with another video on architectural design, this time to talk about a topic that is one of the most important in our profession, the relationships between buildings and their surroundings. Despite the fact that human behavior has changed a lot recently, almost nobody likes to be ignored or disdained when he or she gets to a place without knowing anyone. Neither does architecture. Architecture likes that its components relate well and that a building is not a visual or functional aggression for anyone. This is precisely what can be called courtesy in architecture. That when two buildings, two spaces, or two materials meet, they fit together well, and that this fit favors a permanent relationship. When intervening in any environment, we have two alternatives: integration or contrast. The experience accumulated in cities show that integration is in general the most correct attitude, as it values the existing, establishes continuity with the historic city, and makes the inhabitants of the city feel part of a continuous historical evolution. However, this does not mean giving up a formal identity of its time for any new building. The following is a small number of instances where positive connections are established between the new and the existing, which do not exhaust the theme, far from it, but can serve as inspiration for those who examine the projects carefully. We begin with the principle of the second man, which was conceived of by Edmund Bacon, an architect and urbanist who taught at the University of Pennsylvania and worked in several urban projects in Philadelphia, some of them in partnership with Lou Kahn. What Bacon meant by the principle of the second man is that when somebody works in a place, he or she looks at what has been done before and tries to follow from that. And he illustrated in his book Design of Cities, he illustrated the concept by showing what happened in this square, the one we're looking in this engraving here, the Piazza della Nunciata in Florence, Italy. It begins in 1427, when Brunelleschi remodels the old Ospedale degli Innocenti, employing Roman elements in a way that had never been done before. That is, building a portico with arches supported by columns. 27 years later, Michelozzo is hired to finish the Church of the Annunziata, and he does so by imitating Brunelleschi's portico. Almost 2 centuries later, Sangallo and Dagnolo built a loggia across the square from the Ospedale, and what they essentially did at the building's facade was to mirror Brunelleschi's portico. This way was created one of Florence's most consistent and unified urban spaces. No wonder it is one of the most visited sites by architects and tourists. However, not everyone partakes of this principle. Here we see two art galleries on the same street which approach the problem in very different ways. The first one is a building by Norman Foster, And the second one is a building by the Japanese office Sana. Foster's design is discrete and divides the volume in two parts, receding the highest part of the building, which has less impact on the street profile. Apart from that, the the lower part is totally integrated in volumetric terms and in its height to the neighborhood, to what's beside. The Sanaa building, although it seems to want to establish a relationship with its neighbor, does so without conviction, revealing that the architect's real interest was to create an object that looks like a series of stacked boxes that took a sudden jerk, which incidentally is a formal solution repeated by many others. When this museum was expanded just a year ago, the situation became even worse with regard to the relationship with the neighbors. The option was the option taken by OMA was clearly for contrast, and the dialogue with the Sanaa building is limited to the coincidence of an edge. Almost a century ago, in 1934, Asplund showed us that it is possible to enlarge a neoclassical building without having to resort to the same architectural elements. Using a three-dimensional grid, an important element of the modernist repertoire, Asplund manages to continue the rhythm of the columns and openings of the existing building, in addition to coordinating the horizontal members of the grid with the neighbors' levels. Even acting with deference in relation to the pre-existence, Asplund feels the need to clearly mark the transition between the original building and its extension, and does so by means of a setback between them, a kind of negative space in the architectural jargon. Here we see the original plan by Asplund. In yellow, the existing building of the law courts. In blue, Asplund's addition. And in red, the, the element which is set back in the facade in order to differentiate new from old. Ignacio Gardella intervenes in Venice, seeking formal closeness through volume, texture, color, even drawing on the existing architectural elements. This strategy was adequate to that situation because it maintained environmental values, but it soon proved to be difficult to generalize because the use of local elements literally implies a forced submission to the surroundings. One interesting aspect of this new building in Venice, one of the few new buildings, is that it employs the same strategy as employed by Asplund in the Law Courts edition. What I mean by that is that there is a slice of building which is set back in between the Gardella building and the church, which sets them apart. And this can be seen also on the plan. The yellow part is the part set back, which helps the architect to make the connection. Aalto was very sensitive to the context of his buildings. Here we will see three interventions in the same area of Helsinki. In the three projects, the facades consist of metal grids in which the openings predominate, unlike what happens around them. However, these grids absorb the height of the floors and openings of the neighbors, which already establishes a positive relationship between them. But what really makes these buildings fit into their surroundings are their specific volumetric configurations. At Rautatalo, the volume is equivalent to that of the neighbor on the right, establishing no relationship of height with that of the left. At the Nordic bank, the overall form is broken, adopting different heights on each side. The third building, the academic bookstore, completes the corner and continues the street facade on both sides. It is still worth emphasizing the quality of the interior space of two of these buildings, both with triple height and lighting from above. This is the atrium at the Nordic Bank, and this is the space inside the academic bookstore. Jacobsen's building for the Jaspersen Company fills a gap in the inhabited wall that defines a huge block. Here he opts for a very discreet, almost neutral building which barely touches the floor to allow vehicular access to the interior of the block. But this apparent discretion hides an ingenious technical solution. Since the building is supported by a structural system that resembles a tree, there are no pillars on the facades, and the slabs unload on beams in the center of the plan, which in turn transfer the load to two single pillars positioned so as to leave free space for the cars to pass. Le Corbusier solves here a difficult problem due to the extension of the program in comparison to the limited area of the site, without losing sight of the visual integration with the neighboring houses, which he did not even know personally. Using different elements, he does something similar to what Aalto did at the Nordic Bank. That is, on each side, the Courrouchet house has a height compatible with its respective neighbor. In the PepsiCo building, Gordon Bunshaft solves two problems at once. He locates the service course on the interior boundaries of the site and recedes the core on the Park Avenue side, lined with black granite, which gives it autonomy in relation to the adjacent building, a solution similar to that of Asplund in Gothenburg and Gardella in Venice. The expansion of the Albright Knox Museum was a difficult problem, since the building to be expanded was a complete and symmetrical form in neoclassical style. The solution found by Bunshaft is extremely qualified. It keeps the existing facades intact, without breaking their symmetry, and proposes that the expansion should have only one floor, the height of which coincides with the base of the old museum, precisely the line from which the Ionic columns start, configuring a podium. On this low rectangle, aligned with the longest axis of symmetry of the old building, two squares are inscribed. One of them is a patio towards which the restaurant and administrative spaces are turned, and the other an auditorium, the only element that stands out and up from the podium top level, although without touching its edges. A solution that is both modern and committed to preserving the original building. Mario Roberto Alvarez was one of the most important Argentine architects of the 20th century. In the AMAX building, he manages to vary the height of the building, making each end coincide with the neighbor's heights. The tray layout of the building, kind of vertical stacking of trays, helps a lot in this regard. The second project by Alvarez demonstrates an enormous sensitivity towards urbanism and the role of the architect in the construction of a city in which it is good to live. Instead of building a huge tower aligned with the avenue, Alvarez decides to separate the program into three blocks. Two of them have the same height as the neighbors and flank an open space that joins the street. The third block is a tower that is almost twice the height of the first two, but is placed at the bottom at the back of the site, minimizing its impact on the street and configuring the third side of the space that the project offers to the city. This is the first major work of Lucan's career, realized when he was over 50 years old. Having to expand the Yale University Art Gallery, Kant's project adopts an attitude of modesty and respect at the same time that features of his mature work start to appear. The new wing is a block made up of three space units, two larger ones for exhibitions and a narrower one in between that serves them. The contact with the old gallery is made through another narrower space, which creates a recess on both sides of the connection, giving a certain autonomy to both parts of the new building. Two other decisions reveal Kant's supporting role for the new wing. The access to this part is through a door in a glass wall perpendicular to the street, making it less visible, and the facade of the main street has no openings, which directs one's attention to the existing access in the older part of the building. This is a competition for the expansion of the Naval School of Barcelona, whose headquarters is a neoclassical building with three floors, organized symmetrically in both directions, although the symmetry is only manifested in the facades that are on the shortest axis. In yellow, the site of the competition and the existing building. The project submitted to the contest seems to have undergone an evolution consisting of several stages. The first one is somewhat obvious, as it makes the main facade parallel to the avenue that cuts the rectangular plot diagonally. In the second stage, the block of the addition loses a central part and is turned into a U shape or a base plus two elevated bodies. The third step consists of cutting the sides at an angle to expose the towers in the corners of the school building. And the fourth one, a very subtle one, the top of the extension is tilted towards the school. The result of this is that someone passing along Dr. Aiguader Street, the diagonal side of the site, will constantly see parts of the old school building behind the new wing. The existing building never disappears behind the addition. Here we see two perspective views submitted to the competition, which show always the old building through the center of the U-shaped new addition, and here passing along we see the new with the old, and also we see the effect of tilting the top of the building towards the old building. A brilliant solution in which the existing building is highly valued by the expansion, while the expansion has its own identity. It's a shame that it was not built. In a video in which he talks about his work, Alberto Campo Baeza said of the interest aroused by the opportunity to design the Museum of Andalusia, as it allowed him to build a piece of a city by relating it directly to a previous work, the headquarters of Caja Granada, a building that contains one of the most striking interior spaces in recent decades. Having adopted a partie, there is a formal strategy in which the museum would be an elongated rectangle with a vertical element at one end. Campo Baeza established the connection with the Caja Granada in two ways. The whole building would have the same width as the Caja's cube, and the heights of its two constituent parts, base and tower, would coincide with the height of the base and the cube of the caja, respectively. These relationships are easily perceived when one sees the two buildings together at some distance. One aspect to remark is that both buildings are deceptively simple. While inside Caja Granada there is a fantastic space that reminds us of the Pantheon and certain Boulez projects, the, the Museum of Andalusia box hides within it an elliptical courtyard occupied by intersecting helical ramps. Nothing outside prepares us for the amazing spaces that can be discovered if one enters these two buildings. The Previsión Española headquarters building defines once more the perimeter of the old city, consolidates the city's road structure, gives access to the interior of the block through two passages, and, due to its horizontality, refers to the old city wall and sets off the Torre de Oro, an important monument located in front of it. The library and student center by Barozzi Veiga at the same time defines the end of an existing block and defines one side of the square without resorting to any stylistic dialogue with its context. The fitting occurs through the dimensions of the new building and its position in relation to the surroundings. To end this video, another building by Barozzi Veiga, this time a museum in Switzerland, which shows a smart way to double the museum space without touching, apparently, the existing building. The extension looks like an exempt building since the connection to the older building is underground. Also noteworthy is the layout of the plans, which take up the Palladian theme of the main building. Thank you very much for watching one more video. I hope you liked and come back, and please subscribe to the channel.